Good morning. I'm Ginny Stibolt, and I am a member of the Florida Native Plant Society. I'm addicted to the Florida Native Plant Society. It changed my life. So just before I get started, I wanted to do a pitch. October is the Florida Native Plant Society's month of native plants, and I have some brochures in the back if you have a place to post them. And I think that people who are in the business of maintaining open lands can use the Florida Native Plant Society as a resource to help educate people about how important natives are. So with that, I'll get started. What my point is here is that the people who live next to open lands, you can help them be better neighbors by putting in native plants and by better managing their landscapes. One of the things that happens when a development is put in next to a wild area is that the developer puts sod right up next to the wild area. And that's really incompatible. A normally managed sod area is usually incompatible with that area. So we'll talk about that. Consumers are trained to want pretty plants that are in full bloom. And so they go to big box stores, and this is what they see normally. And they take these plants that are in full bloom, that have actually completed their life cycle, and they put them in their landscapes and they die. So they have to go back and plant more, and this is very good for the bottom line of the big box stores because the consumers keep planting and planting and planting. The native plant cycle is a little bit different. Also, people are trained by the television programs and stuff like that where landscapers come in and they magically transform a landscape into something else, and it is thought of that the landscaping is an event instead of an ongoing process. And so then once you put in the plants that you're done, which of course is not true. This is one of my neighbors' landscaping, and this was a few years ago, and they put in 3 dump load trucks full of dirt at the front, or soil at the front of their property to build this great mound, and they put the plants on top of it, and then they realized that they hadn't taken drainage into account, and they ended up every time it rained to get water directed right into their house. So they do need to plan ahead a little bit better than that. They got it all re-landscaped again, and now they're on the 3rd one after this one. So if they had left it flat and put in some rain gardens or something, they would have been done. And the problem we also have is that there are plants like crepe myrtle and other Asian azaleas and other things that are so ubiquitous, and they grow everywhere, and they do well, that many landscapes look like they could be almost anywhere. So what we want to convince people of is that they really want an authentic Florida yard and not an anywhere in the U.S. Florida yard. So we want to help convince them that a ficus hedge is not Florida. It's not sustainable. So when you have a lawn, a normally poisoned lawn next to a natural area, it's really an incompatible situation. The ecotone between the two habitats is not good. So we need to convince people who are next to our native areas that they need to have a buffer of some kind. And there are a number of different buffers that you can put in, and usually we would want native plants. And so we would say take the back 10 feet of the property that goes along the border of your managed land and plant it with natives. And where are they going to get those native plants? They're not going to get them in the big box stores. So this is where the Florida Native Plant Society or the Florida Association of Native Plant Nurseries comes into play. You can partner with them so that you can have plant sales where the native plants are presented for you. The other thing about having trees and forest land next to a lawn is that the trees will win in the battle for water. They have shallow roots. They can transpire gallons and gallons of water in a day, where the lawn is not going to be nearly as powerful as a tree. And so you really, is a good idea, and you need to convince people it's a good idea to keep the lawns away from the trees, because it's not good for the tree and it's not good for the lawn. And managing the edges of a lawn, and we'll get to what kind of lawn we recommend, is an ongoing process. You can do a foot or 3 feet at a time, and then you can come back in a couple of years and do some more so that the lawn area can be reduced. And then there you have better habitat next to the area. And then you would mulch it, if you can, with the natural leaves and other materials that come from the neighborhood and not from someplace else. All right, so here's an edge in my yard, and there was a natively sown beautyberry bush that grew at the top, and there were water oaks that grew right around it. So if I want to encourage the beautyberry, I had to dig up those water oaks. Not cut them off, because if I cut them off, they would just resprout. So at the bottom there, you show that the ferns and the beautyberry are there by themselves. And then the next year, the beautyberry grew quite a bit. And you really want to have bushes and shrubs along the edges of the forested land. The other thing is that you would find that the native plants, well, those are the ones you want to encourage. There's going to be other plants too, but the native plants will creep into the lawn. And so we need to teach people that listening to the landscape is going to be important. So again, this is my yard, and the ferns, and these are netted chain ferns, Woodwardia aerulata, are growing into the lawn. And so my husband, who mows the lawn, I marked off a spot, and he said, don't mow here anymore. And then eventually I pulled the St. Augustine out. The St. Augustine was a vast area when we moved into our house. But when you do pull back the lawn edges, if you have an irrigation installation, the heads of the irrigation heads might have been flushed to the ground because they were in lawn and they'd be mowed over. And if you take the lawn away and you have taller plants, then you need to replace those sprinkler heads. So this is what we've done. We've raised them up on PVC pipes and then put a different kind of sprinkler head on the top so that it would go over the ferns and the shrubs that are there. And again, you'd want to dig out the trees that you did not want, or the shrubs that you did not want in that edge area that is going to be lower than the tree things, because if you just clip them off, it creates more maintenance. And the part that you would want to really encourage people is that maybe at the back edge that you would have a hedge row rather than a hedge, and that down the sides you would have a hedge row, which would be a combination of shrubs that would not need trimming. So this is a hedgerow that would include, well, unfortunately, there's a little bit of Asian azalea, but there's native azaleas, there's beautyberries, and then you've got your oak leaf hydrangea, that each of the shrubs would look good in different parts of the different times of the year. So during one time, all the beautyberries are going to have those unbelievable purple berries, and then at another time your hydrangea will be blooming, another time your native azaleas will be blooming, or whatever those shrubs are. Now my flora in northern Florida is not the same as your Florida down here, but you would have your shrubs and know how big they were going to get and plant them, not in a row, but in a zigzag situation that creates good habitat at the backs of the properties. And you'd want to probably, when you're talking to people, talk to them about how you would attract the birds to the yard by having this. And so there's a lot of bird watchers and people who belong to Audubon Society, and they would be those that are interested in this. But if you want to attract birds, you have to attract the bugs. And they don't quite get that. There's a disconnect there. Doug Tallamy he looks pretty innocent here, but he is our superhero for people who are enthusiastic about native plants, because he changed the argument for native plants. It wasn't that we want native plants just because. We want native plants because they service the ecosystem. Even on a small yard, your native plants can serve the ecosystem. And of course, if you have more small yards in a neighborhood, then they can all service it. So his book, Bringing Nature Home, is one of the best-selling nature books in the last couple of years, and many of you probably heard him talk. He's been on the speaker circuit all over the country for the last few years. When you work with native nurseries, sometimes they'll have plants in full bloom, so they look beautiful, like the ones that you would find in the Home Depot and the Lowe's, but other times they would need to have information signs so that the people would know how big they're going to get, where they need to be planted, and what they might look like. And they need to have their expectations. Somebody was talking to me earlier today about Spanish needles, and what are we going to do about them? They attract so many butterflies, but they're a weed. I mean, so people, and this is a snow square stem, and again, it attracts butterflies and other pollinators like crazy, but it'll get big and it gets rangy. I started with one little plant that I got at a Florida Native Plant Society meeting, and now I have probably 200 plants, and I pot up other ones and give them away, and so it ends up reseeding quite dramatically. But you still, yes, you might consider it a weed, but you still want to keep some of them available. And here's that Biden's alba, which is also a tremendously aggressive weed. Obviously, it's not invasive because it's native, but oh my gosh, the pollinators that are attracted to this are just amazing. And we need to convince people that we don't want pesticides in their yards. And some people say, well, you don't need pesticides because native plants have adjusted, but we don't want to put pesticides on it because we want those caterpillars. We want them. And we want to encourage people to feed the butterflies not only for the nectar, but also for the larval food, so that you'd want to have those caterpillars. Now the lawns, let's talk about lawns. The normal caretaking of lawns would include some guy coming with his poison truck, and he would put fungicides, insecticides, herbicides, weed and feed, fertilizer, and it costs a lot of money. Then he puts up a little sign there saying, don't go on the lawn because it's poison. So what we want to encourage people to do, and encourage the homeowners associations to approve, is to, yes, you might want lawns, but let's just let them be. So a freedom lawn would be filled not only with the original grass, but then all kinds of other plants, so that it would be not a monoculture, but it would have diversity. Now that's my front lawn, and it looks as green as the one across the street, but he pays a lot of money to have somebody come and spray his lawn. But mine is just as green most of the time. And I let it go dormant in the winter and don't mow it from November to March. But I've got a lot of plants. I've got dollarweed, I've got St. John's wort, I've got rain lilies, I've got asters, I've got toadflax, I've got white-top sedge, I've got sunshine mimosa. I mean, so there's a whole lot of different plants that you can have growing in a lawn. And here's a lawn that we, a triangle. We lost a tree in the hurricane. We moved to Florida in 2004, and then we got hit by 4 hurricanes. And that was our welcome to Florida. So that sweet gum got knocked out by the hurricane, so we just took out the whole triangle of lawn and let it grow. And then a few years later, it ends up being a meadow area. So we go in and take out the trees, but it ends up being a good habitat so that that meadow attracts woodcocks in the winter. And if I didn't have that meadow, if it just had wooded area and lawn area, I wouldn't get the woodcocks. The other part that you want to talk to the adjacent landowners about is keeping some of the rainwater on their property. So the sequestering of rainwater is a two-pronged approach for homeowners. You can do rain barrels and you can do rain gardens. And a rain garden is probably most important because it takes that water and it sequesters it. Now the plants that you can plant in Florida rain gardens, it's a very limited number of plants because they need to be able to withstand flooding, and with our 7-month dry period, they need to withstand drought. There's not very many. In other parts of the country, they say, oh, cardinal flowers are great for rain gardens, but not in Florida because they wouldn't make it through the 7-month dry period. You don't want to have to water a rain garden. So it's a swale, and you would end up planting plants that will do that. I have my sustainable gardening book has a whole chapter on rain gardens and another one on rain barrels. So that's an important part because the more water that we can have go through the soil and not out onto the streets and not through the storm drains, the better quality our rainwater our waterways will be. So every action makes a difference. And The Art of Maintaining a Florida Native Landscape is a new book that I wrote, and it helps people manage their expectations about native plants. Because native plants, the no maintenance landscape is a lie. They do need maintaining, they do need care, they do need establishment, and so I talk about that. And 50% of the royalties for this book goes to the Native Plant Society in Florida. So that's my plea, is to help those adjacent landowners be better neighbors to your natural property. So, any questions? Yeah, okay. Thank you.